Alright, so what I wanted to do today was take a look at Resident Evil 6, and it's already a debatable topic as to whether this game is good or not. My kind of stance on the game is that it's a fun game to play, and it's enjoyable to play through with a friend, but is it a Resident Evil game? Absolutely not. But today we're going to talk about more of a potential remake and what they could do if they were going to do it to improve the game. Straight out of the gate, I do want to say, I think out of all of the games they were to remake, this would be the hardest one to do, purely because of how big in scope the game is. Like, there's a lot in this game that goes on, and a lot of different mechanics and features that you can do, and a lot of different scenarios. And if they were to do it, I think it's probably not the top of the list. I think it will be a while off if they were even going to do it, so don't expect it anytime soon. But we are just going to spitball some ideas on how they could improve it. So yeah, without any further delay, let's just get into it. Alright, so let's talk about the campaigns. So I think out of all the campaigns we have, the one that feels the most Resident Evil is Leon's, and it's not all the way through. I think until about the point where you get to China, it feels very similar to 5 in a sense. There's not a lot of combat. What there is very kind of done in short bursts. It does also have those moments where there's puzzles, or you've got to go find items to unlock doors, and it does feel very akin to RE4 and RE5 in some ways. But then after the part of the game when you get to China, it does kind of change drastically, and it does kind of lean more towards combat, and that is across all the campaigns. Saying that though, I think Leon's campaign definitely needs the less work going into it. I think the last half of the campaign needs to change a bit, but in terms of all three, I think Chris is probably the one that needs to be really looked at, because that campaign is so combat focused, and it makes sense because of the story and what he's doing, but it's so heavy on the combat. You go from Leon's campaign to going through a creepy house like this and fighting a few zombies every now and again, to in Chris's campaign, there's a moment where you are literally flying a jet and shooting the jets out of the sky. Again, because of what you're doing in that moment, it makes sense, but for a Resident Evil game, it does not make sense at all, and it's so out there for what you would usually expect from the series, and I think a lot of the game is like that. In terms of Jake and Sherry's campaign, I think I've played that one the least, and I remember certain parts of it being fine, but then I remember a tank being a boss fight, which was weird. And there's also a section where you're kind of driving a motorbike at high speeds while Sherry shoots off the back. So again, there is moments where it does kind of really ramp up in action, and it's not like it's every now and again, the game is mostly like that. But I would say that Leon's campaign is, it starts off slowly and it builds into the action, rather the other two kind of go straight into it, balls to the wall combat most of the way through. That being said, I don't think they should remove any of the campaigns. I think they're all good in their own way, but in terms of scaling them down, I would say probably make them so they're at the same level as RE5. Have those big set-piece combat sections if you really want them, and if they make sense to the story. But for the most part, with the combat sessions, keep it very similar to, Resident Evil 5. They're not massively scaled, there's a decent amount of enemies, and there's a lot going on, but Resident Evil 5 has a pacing where there's big combat sessions and there's a break, and then there's big combat sessions again, then there's a break, kind of like RE4, but it leans into more action sequences rather than less action sequences. So it would kind of still walk a fine line between the two, but it would lean more into combat rather than kind of horror or puzzle sections. I think in terms of gameplay, I'll probably say the same things I said about a RE5 remake later down the line. Keep the combat very similar to the 4 remake we have now, with a parry system and the obviously over-the-shoulder, third-person, high combat kind of feel. It feels very, very good in RE4. If you haven't played the remake yet, which I'm sure you have, the combat is incredible. So probably keep that in RE5 and RE6 as well. RE6 is very fun in terms of the combat, to be honest. There's a lot of cool melee stuff you can do. Environmental kills and stuff are all there as well. So I think probably keep some of that in there as well, because it is fun. But the combat should lean more towards the RE4 remake and how that does it, rather than RE2 or RE3 remake, which is slower paced, because the overall game is also slower paced. In terms of story, I don't know what they would do to change it. I do feel like Resident Evil 6's story is kind of muddled up, and it does kind of fall flat at certain parts. So I don't know how they would change it. I'm sure they would figure out a way. But the story is fine. It's not the best or the strongest one we have, but it is fine. But I'd imagine they'd want to change it slightly, because with the remakes, with them being the canon storyline now, they probably want to change it in some fashion. A couple of final notes to add, small things I suppose. One, keep the Mercenaries mode that's in 6 in the game. It is honestly one of the more fun versions of Mercenaries I've played, and I really do like it. And one thing I really find frustrating about Resident Evil 6 that needs to probably be addressed in the remake is the constant, well not constant, but there's a fair amount of times where the campaigns overlap, and you end up doing the same encounters again. There's a couple boss fights but you have to do it again. There's one with the Ustanak with Jake and Sherry and Leon and Helena. There's one with like the giant BOW with Chris and Piers and Jake and Sherry, and it doesn't need to be done twice. It's exactly the same fight again. So I don't know if that's because they're trying to pad out the time, but it just doesn't really. I don't like that, basically. But yeah, all in all, I think the game is fun. Final note, obviously keep it co-op because it's more fun to play it with a friend. I don't think it would have the same feel if it was solo. I said the same thing about Resident Evil 5 as well. I think if there's a remake of that, keep it co-op. Some people disagree, but I would just prefer it to be co-op because that's how the original was kind of made to be played, and I really hope they keep that in the game. But yeah, overall, the game is fun, and I definitely enjoy it, but it is not a Resident Evil game. It's fun to play with a friend, it's fun to play through every now and again, and we'll be making more videos on it in the future. But for now, let me know your thoughts on a remake for the game. Would you want to see it? Do you want them to skip it? Let me know. But as always, thank you all for watching. Remember to leave a like on the video if you did enjoy, and subscribe for more Resident Evil content if you are new, and I'll catch you in the next one.